Hello and welcome. Have you ever just looked around your city and wondered why is everything laid out the way it is? Why some neighborhoods are all about business, others are all homes, and why on earth that one street has all the same type of shops right next to each other? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain and reveal the hidden logic that actually shapes our world.
Yeah, on the surface, cities can feel like total chaos, just a random jumble of buildings and roads. But what if I told you there's a method to all that madness? That there's a hidden order guided by some really powerful economic and social forces that we can not only understand, but even predict.
So here's our game plan for today. First, we'll look at 3 classic blueprints for how cities grow. Then, we'll peek inside the modern city planner's toolkit. After that, we'll get into the invisible economic forces that are always at play. And finally, we'll put it all together so you can see your own city in a totally new light.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Long before we had all these complex computer models, geographers were trying to create simple blueprints to explain this incredibly complex thing we call a city.
Our whole understanding of cities really evolved like crazy in the first half of the 20th century. We went from a really simple idea back in 1925 to something a bit more nuanced in 39, and then finally to a model in 1945 that looks a lot more like the cities we live in today. So let's break them down.
First up is the Concentric Zone Model. The idea here is actually pretty simple. A city grows in layers, kind of like an onion. At the absolute center, you have the Central Business District, or CBD. Think of a place like Connaught Place in Delhi. As you move out, you go through these distinct rings of industry, then working-class homes, and finally, way out on the edge, the suburbs. It's like a classic bullseye. Now, of course, it's a simplification, but it gave us our first real framework for understanding urban structure.
But let's be real, cities aren't perfect circles, are they? So the sector model came along and refined this idea. It argued that cities don't just expand in rings, but in wedges, or sectors, that push outward along major transportation lines. You can totally see this in a city like Delhi, with all the development clustered along the Metro Blue Line or big roads. This was a really key insight, right? It was the first to recognize just how much things like roads and trains shape how a city grows. And by 1945, cities were getting even more complex. The Multiple Nuclei Model finally recognized that a modern city isn't built around just one center, it has a bunch of them. Connaught Place might be the historic heart of Delhi, sure, but places like Narrow Place for all the electronics, or the huge corporate hubs in Gurgaon and Noida, they're all powerful, independent centers in their own right. This really reflects the fragmented, specialized nature of a modern city. The truth is, most cities today are kind of a messy mix of all 3 of these models.
So we've seen the historical blueprints, but how do planners actually manage cities today? Well, they've swapped those simple diagrams for a really powerful toolkit. A huge part of this is econometrics, which I know is a fancy term, but it basically just means using data and statistics to understand economic problems and predict what might happen next.
So, a key tool in this kit is the hedonic pricing model. It sounds complicated, but the idea is so simple. You figure out a property's price by just breaking it down into all its individual features. You start with a base value, right? Then you add money for the good stuff, like a great park view or being close to the metro. And then you subtract a little for the not-so-good things, like maybe the building is really old.
And here's a perfect real-world example of this. A planner at the Delhi Development Authority, the DDA, uses this exact logic. That amazing forest view from a flat in Vasant Kunj? Yeah, that's not free. It has a specific value that gets added right onto the price as a surcharge. That is literally hedonic pricing in action. And planners have other cool tools too. With something called input-output analysis, they can actually map the ripple effect of a huge project, like how a new flyover might boost local shops and the demand for housing nearby. And with shift-share analysis, they can figure out if a neighborhood is growing because of its own unique vibe, or if it's just kind of riding a bigger national economic wave. It's all about separating what's local from the bigger picture.
Okay, so let's shift gears from the planners to the forces that affect every single one of us. These are the fundamental economic rules that are silently, invisibly organizing our cities all the time.
This right here is the bid rent theory, and honestly, it explains so much. The most important point is this. Land is most valuable at the very center of the city, and it gets cheaper the further away you go. It's why you see all those massive skyscrapers packed into the downtown core. They have to build up to make the crazy high land cost worth it, while you find bigger houses with yards out in the suburbs where land is just more affordable.
So, have you ever been to a place like Chandni Chowk in Delhi and wondered why are all the cloth merchants on the same street? It seems weird, right? Wouldn't they want less competition? Well, it turns out there's a really powerful economic reason they all huddle together. And the answer is agglomeration economies. This is the big idea that businesses actually benefit from being near each other. They can share suppliers, they can pull from the same pool of skilled workers, but most importantly, they create a destination. If you need cloth, you know exactly where to go. That whole cluster of stores becomes a magnet for customers, which ends up benefiting everybody there.
All right, we've covered a ton of ground. So before we get to our final takeaways, let's do a super quick pop quiz just to see how these ideas are connecting for you.
First question, which model suggests that the fancy high-class areas tend to develop in wedges that follow major transportation routes? Was it the concentric circles, the sectors, or the multiple centers?
And the answer is B, the sector model. Yep, it saw growth not as perfect rings, but as those wedges radiating out along really important things like railways and highways.
Okay, and what about that awesome benefit businesses get from clustering all together in one spot? What do we call that powerful economic force?
That's C, agglomeration economies. By clustering together, all those cloth merchants in Chandni Chowk create a powerful customer magnet that helps every single one of them.
So what have we done here? We've journeyed through the old school models, we've peeked inside the planner's toolkit, and we've uncovered the deep economic forces at work. Let's bring it all home with the key takeaways.
So what are the big things to remember? First, the shape of our cities is not an accident. It follows these observable patterns of growth. Second, modern planning is a real science, using data-driven tools to manage how our cities develop. And third, everything is shaped by these basic economic principles that decide the price of land and the location of businesses.
And that leaves us with one final big question. We've seen these models evolve from simple circles to multiple centers. But now, with things like remote work, e-commerce, and new kinds of transit totally challenging the old rules, what's the next city blueprint going to look like? What forces will shape the city of tomorrow? It's something to think about the next time you walk through your own neighborhood. Thanks for joining me.